Kong Biennale of Urbanism Architecture session, as organized by Hong Kong Institute of Architects Biennale Foundation in association with Hong Kong Institute of Architects, Hong Kong Institute of Planners, and Hong Kong Design Association. Now, just to remind everybody, the main title of this Biennale is 2x2, Imagine to Innovate. And we're very lucky to have our title sponsor, DBS, and I'll talk about that a bit later because it's very, very connected to what we're talking about today. And this particular series of talk curatorial conversations is sponsored, the venue sponsor in this magnificent building by Hopar Music Foundation, and also co-organized by the RIBA Hong Kong chapter. For those who've actually joined us from previous curatorial conversation, you would have noticed a slight change of scenery here. This slightly reminds me of President Roosevelt's fireside chat. A lot of people talk about fireside chat, but they never really realize where it came from. But of course, Roosevelt had fire. We were halfway there. We had a fireplace without fire, but we thought lighting the fire wouldn't be very consistent with our theme of sustainability. So it's a fireside chat without fire, if you see what I mean. But anyway, yes, exactly. So the idea of the Biennale events are to explore the interrelationship between the three sub-themes of our Biennale, which is sustainability, livability, and identity, not in any particular order. And for this particular session is curatorial conversation number 12, which is reporting and benchmarking sustainability. In a way, it's part of it actually refers to an earlier session, curatorial conversation number 9, which is on communicating and delivering sustainability. So there are a lot of themes that kind of cross over, which we will probably talk about a little bit later on. Now, so joining me here today, on my right is Jonny, which I would introduce him a little bit later on, and also online we have our guest presenter Ding Li, and also one of my co-curators, Alan Zhang. He's been helping us, all along, as well as two of our international curatorial advisors, Laura, as well as Peter, Laura Mazzio, and Peter Murray, all the way from London. So, a little bit about the session today. I've always actually, right from the beginning of organizing the Biennale, I've always been a bit nervous about just talking about sustainability. What can we actually do about sustainability through the Biennale? Well, okay, talking about it through sharings, workshops, and symposiums, these are important because they are means by which we can change people's behavior, change people's lifestyle to be more sustainable, to be more conscious about carbon footprint and so on and so forth. But at the back of my mind, I've always thought that, well, is there something more? Because everybody's talking about it. A lot of people are talking about it. A lot of people are talking about, ranging very technical things, very cutting edge technology to very simple things like, we talk
passive
about
design.
Exactly. So is there something more that we can do about it? And especially what happens after the Biennale? We can talk about it for 3 months through or more in our, during the period of our Biennale. What would, if there is to be some legacy, what would it look like? So that's been kind of going through my head, right from the beginning. And then very, very fortunately, we halfway through our planning process, we were managed to convince sponsorship from DBS. Now, this is particularly important because sustainability has been in the last few years a main focus of DBS CSR initiatives. So they were really keen on us promoting sustainability, and they were very keen. I mean, we were in one of our earlier sessions before the COVID-19. We had, we would talk about sustainable banking and all that. So it's a cross spectrum, both in terms of the infrastructure of our cities, but as well as in terms of the software of our cities, how we could all promote the idea of sustainability. And through the sponsorship, there were 3 key parts apart from obviously sponsoring the exhibition itself and the talks. 3 very key parts which I thought was doing what I really wanted to do about sustainability is that we've done a report which is really what this Biennale session is about. So we're reporting on how much we've actually, expend, the carbon footprint of our own carbon footprint. Now, we are prepared for a shock. We are prepared for the result. But at the end, we want to, we also, through the sponsorship, we will do something about it. There is a budget earmarked for carbon offsetting. So, whatever carbon that we expended, we've spent, we would do something about it. But actually, more importantly, the third part, which is the benchmarking, is that, we hope this is the first step of a journey where hopefully others will learn from, and they don't have to start the process from scratch like we did again, to build on it. I mean, this is, Jonny and I will keep telling you this is not perfect report in the sense that there are a lot of things we wanted to, could have done better. Starting with the fact that it would have been better if we started right from the beginning, but nonetheless, I think some of the things that we've learned could really help the decision making in future biennales, but also exhibitions and so on and so forth. And we will certainly come to that those discussions a bit later on when we talk about the report itself. So now, on the other hand, we've managed, because of this, we've also managed to take some advantage of the circumstances of social movement or the COVID-19 situation to actually make things better, which we will again talk about a bit later. And in various discussions we've had so far, a lot of very interesting topics has arisen, and which I hope we could share some today. And I know for all of you are chomping at the bits to hear what Jonny has to say. So what I would do is that I will now sort of introduce Jonny a little bit, and then I'll pass the mic to you. So Jonny Perks is associate from a company called Steensen Varming. So Jonny will talk to you a little bit more about it, I'm sure, what they do. And in fact, I can't remember how long we've known each other, but we were introduced to one of your colleagues who also work in Steensen Varming. And the funny thing was, very early on when we started talking about this project, and I had the feeling that we kind of talk very much alike. We think alike, and I thought you must have been educated in a really, really good university, probably one of the best in the world.
By the same tutors.
Yeah. And then it wasn't until earlier session I found out that you were indeed educated in the best university in the universe, which is the University of Bath, and it happens to be the same one that I went to. So there we go. So we kind of have a good kind of connections, and we talk about it, and a lot of the things that it was exactly, the report pretty much is exactly how we've envisaged it, and I think. So I don't want to steal your thunder because you did most of the hard work on the report. I just told you what to do. So so I'll hand the mic over to you, Jonny.
Hi. Yeah. So as we said, I'm Jonny Perks. I work for Steensen Varming, and Steensen Varming as a company. Sorry, Pete. You just press. I think it's automatic.
That's back in this.
Oh, okay, cool. Okay, perfect. Yeah, so Steensen Varming, we are an engineering consultancy firm, and we specialize in building services, sustainability, lighting design, and we focus very much on projects that give something back to communities. So whether that's education or cultural facilities or healthcare, or those kind of developments that we feel bring something positive. So we're creating positive environments, and working with Roger on this has been great, because I think the study that we've done plus the event in itself is an excellent example of bringing communities together, bringing information to communities, educating on sustainability, and it's been a really positive experience for me, and hopefully for everyone that's seen the event. We're a global company, offices in London, Copenhagen, Hong Kong, New York, and Sydney, our biggest office. And I work here in the Hong Kong office, kind of helping head up here in the sustainability team here in Hong Kong. So for the Biennale, we were commissioned to do the carbon footprint study. And I really want to thank Roger for, asking us to sort of get involved, and also to obviously to DBS and the other sponsors and all of Roger's team, for actually making it happen. It's rare that, money and resources are put into actually carrying out an exercise like this, especially with the unknown of how much carbon intensity you're going to have, or whether there will be a positive or negative impact on marketability and things like that. So it's great that we were able to do this study. So what I want to do is just sort of talk through what we did. So the study that we put together, what was included in it, and the methodology, and then some of the outcomes that we did. So the Biennale, for those of you who aren't aware, was kind of split into two main parts. The exhibition, which was there from December 2019 through to March 2020, had about 62 exhibitors, about 60 exhibits, I think, and there were about 200,000 visitors that came through the mills, and also the second site in Futian, in Shenzhen, over the course of that period. And then also we had a number of events. Originally there was planned, I think, around 40 or more events. Due to the COVID-19 situation, there were 17 of the originally planned events that actually took place, and are currently included in this study. And obviously, since March 2020, there have been a series of curatorial conversations, and some of the symposiums have kind of been integrated into this online kind of format, which I think in terms of a per person footprint, it's going to be a beneficial, but obviously it's not so great that we've been forced into this situation. And there are about of the 17 events that did happen, there are about 900 in-person visitors, about 3,500 online views. So just to talk through what we did for this study, it's good to sort of think about first why it was done in the first place. So, obviously, as Roger said, there's a huge focus on sustainability as part of the Biennale. And so it's good to kind of walk the talk, practice what you preach, and sort of show, how the Biennale itself is performing. And that's kind of part of what we've done. But also, what we've done is establish a methodology. We've also established a benchmark for future, and also a series of recommendations for how things could be set up, to maybe reduce that emission, the overall carbon emissions for future events. So it serves a multiple purposes. Just to give a brief overview of what carbon footprinting is. Carbon footprinting is really focused on greenhouse gas emissions. So, carbon is the sort of standard way we talk about greenhouse gases, but there are others in methane and nitrous oxide and other gases as well that contribute to greenhouse gas, but we use carbon as a sort of, or CO2 equivalent, as a shorthand for talking about greenhouse gas and the impact they're going to have on global warming and climate change. And the purpose of kind of carbon footprint analysis is to look at the full life cycle, and from raw materials extraction, production of materials, transportation of materials to the sites, construction of materials, operation, energy and use throughout the operation, what other things like catering and stuff during operation, then demolition at the end of the event or the end of a life cycle of something, and then what happens is are the materials sent to landfill, or are they reused and recycled and sort of start the process again. And for the Biennale, we sort of needed to break down, in order to kind of get a full coverage of what the carbon intensity of the event was, we needed to break it down. So we split it into kind of pre-event planning, activities during the event, and activities afterwards. So beforehand, you've got the design of the event, people going to work, commuting to work in order to design their exhibits. We wanted to make sure that was included in the analysis. Then once they've designed the exhibit, or organized the event, then what materials are going to be needed to produce it, where they're going to come from, how they're going to get to our site, what's going to be needed to construct them, and what will be needed during construction to do that. During the event itself, you need energy, maybe water for it to operate, to function, to supply the buildings with energy as well that it's sitting in. There are visitors that come to visit. There's food that's maybe consumed. All of that has a footprint associated with it, which we try to capture. And then afterwards, what happens to the waste? Where does it go? Is it reused? And then so that hopefully covers the full life cycle of everything that was included within the Biennale. So in order to do that, the process we followed was, first of all, understand the project extent, develop, a methodology for capturing the data and analyzing the data. Then we gathered it, analyzed it, calculate the results, and then review and discuss. And obviously, it would have been great to get everything all at once, but that's never going to happen. So really, it's more of an iterative process. So we gathered some of the data, quite a lot up front, but then we calculated the results. But then we received more, and we ended up kind of including more, and through the revision and through the discussions, we came to a much more complete analysis of everything. So in terms of understanding the extent, we've mentioned 62 exhibitors, 17 events, and everything that's associated with each of those. For the data collection, what we needed to do is for each of the items that we listed in pre-event, during, and after, we needed a methodology for, firstly, what do we want? What information do we want from everybody? And then once we have it, how are we going to use that in order to calculate the carbon emissions of the event? But then also, what if we don't receive everything? So we needed a methodology to make kind of educated assumptions as to how to incorporate the carbon intensity of the activities that we assumed did happen, even if we didn't necessarily have all of the information. And that way, if the information came in the future, we could insert it and replace those figures. But it enabled us to kind of calculate what is a reasonable estimate of the total carbon intensity of the event. So I won't talk through everything, on these pages, just to but this gives you an overview of kind of how we approached each of the sections. So in pre-event planning, if, for example, materials, there are a certain number of materials. Were they reused before, or were they extracted? Were they extracted purely for the use of the Biennale? Was an exhibit that was previously used, or was it raw materials turned into an exhibit displayed for the first time? Depending on that, the answer, whether you answer yes or no to that, would change how much of the carbon intensity of that exhibit gets associated with the Biennale, and how much is, because if it's reused, then some of that was associated with the previous event that it was used for. And so we needed a methodology to, distribute that carbon in a way that was fair and in a way that was replicable, so that if everyone were to do this exercise, in the future, and an exhibit was to move from event to event to event, you would hope that then the total, at the very, very end, once it gets disposed to landfill, the total carbon intensity of that exhibit was relatively accurately attributed to that. So we have a methodology for calculating that. And we also for planning, for transportation, what type of transportation is used. Obviously, shipping is more effective than flying in terms of its intensity. And then during events, we had visitor transportation. So which mode of transport did they come from? How far did they travel? If they came by car, did they come by car? Did they have, was it 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 people in that car? For catering, we actually didn't have a huge amount of catering, in general for this event. But if we had a lot, we had a little bit, then you obviously got the food selection we talked about a few sessions ago. Like Roger said, what type of different types of food have very, very different carbon footprints. So meat's much higher than, say, just vegetables. And then also what type of cutlery and crockery are used to provide that food. And then after the event, where does the waste go? And then we calculated based on distance to landfill, if it went to landfill. If it was reused for another exhibit, then we didn't necessarily attribute the carbon of that final transportation. We assumed it was part of the next event. So there's benefits to reusing a previous event, and also benefits to not throwing away your exhibit at the end. So we wanted to try and have a fair and representative calculation methodology for all of this. And then to gather the information, we sent questionnaires to everyone. So questionnaires to the exhibitors, to the event organizers, to the mills, to everyone that was associated with the event. And we also had an interactive display for within the hall itself, within the mills, so that anyone that visited and found this interactive display was able to say where they came from, and what method of transport they used and how far they'd come. And we used that data that was collected, knowing that obviously it was a small sample size, but we used that to help get a representative sample of where people had come from. And then we extrapolated that from, I think we had about 250 or 300 responses, and we extrapolated that out for all the visitors that came to the Biennale during the course of the event. And then we calculated the results. This here shows the distribution. So you've got exhibits on the left, events after that on the right of the exhibits, then local transport emissions is the tallest grey box, and then the orange is flights. Now it's worth noting that while the local transport is by far the biggest, that represents about 200,000 people, distributed in a way, obviously a little bit, but it's 200,000 people versus flights, which I think was less than 20 people. So 20 people were able to have the equivalent emissions of all of the exhibits, embodied carbon emissions in total, and all of the events emissions. But obviously having lots and lots of local transport, you're having that many people traveling that much, it's going to add up. But I see this as a positive, that the local transport is the highest emitter. It's what you would want to see. So moving to the exhibits themselves, this is a breakdown of all of the exhibits that were part of the Biennale. And the league table, exactly. Roger's always been a fan of this graph because he talks about naming and shaming, but it's not really naming and shaming. The purpose of this graph is not to say, oh, you are the highest emitter. Ironically, the highest emitter is actually an exhibit called Generating Greener Cities, which I'll come on to in a second. And it is not an unsustainable exhibit in any way. But the purpose of doing this was to sort of see what the distribution was and see what the causes of some of the higher emitting exhibits were. So you look at generating greener cities. This is an exhibit that, it's amazing. It's incredibly intelligent. It I think is a kind of automated way of taking a lot of complex data about an urban plot of land and turning it into a design to an efficient, sustainable design for an urban environment. And the reason why it's so high emitting is because it had a projector at the top and 2 screens, and so with the event going on for about 90 days and these screens and projectors on for about 10 or 12 hours of those days, all of that operational energy adds up and the carbon intensity associated with it adds up, and that's what drives the overall emissions. But arguably what it's doing and the benefit to society of having using this kind of algorithmic approach to designing cities and creating sustainable cities is could potentially outweigh this. Anyway, it's part of a conversation we'll probably have later. On the other end of the spectrum, this is another example. This is a local exhibit, Hodgepodge, which looked at different sources, I think, throughout Hong Kong, and how they were linked to the local communities, and really community-driven kind of exhibit, and really interesting, and but it has very low amounts of materials. It doesn't need any energy to run, and therefore it's low carbon intensive, and also the stand that it was using was reused after the event as well, so that also helps it helps reduce that carbon intensity. So in total, this is a total carbon emission of the exhibit, it's meaningless kind of, I guess, really to just sort of say the number, about 68 tons of carbon, which we'll come into a minute what kind of that equates to when we look at the total. But as you can see here again, that the visitor transport is by far the biggest contributor, and this is driven obviously by the sheer number of visitors. And this just gives you a sort of snapshot of the modal split of the different ways people travel to the site, and then also the distribution of where they've come from. So a lot of people have come from Chinwon, they've just kind of walked, or they've only come a couple of kilometers, and then others have come from far further, so from Lantau Island, or from Sai Kung, or Kowloon, or Central. Moving on to the events, a similar approach was taken. For the events themselves, it was more focused, I guess, on the operational side of things. So the operational energy of the hall itself, the number of people coming, the projector, the operational energy of the projectors, the microphones, the speakers, everything associated with that. We also included, so with these events, because they were enclosed, design, and it was being held for a particular purpose, and people were coming to that room, we included the air conditioning, the lighting for that. For the exhibits, because the mills was operational anyway, and with or without the exhibits in there, unless they had specific energy requirements for the exhibits, we didn't include the ambient kind of conditioning or the ambient lighting. So that kind of helps, I guess, the exhibits themselves, just due to the nature of where they were sitting. And then again, this is even less of a kind of name and shame. Most of this listing all of the events kind of from low to high. I think what's more interesting here is looking at the per person events, so per visitor events. And these are stacked in the same way. So this is, so you've got lowest emissions to highest emissions. And then the same here, but this is, you can see the ones in green are the ones where they had online access as well. And all of those are by far the lowest. And, I think a kind of common theme here is that, by allowing people to stream your and watch your event online, you can probably, one person streaming is probably about 80% reduction of emissions compared to visiting in person. So, even if your overall event, your carbon intensity is going to increase, by having that many more people see it from abroad, it's reducing their travel, it's reducing, that it's a low intensive activity anyway, and you can get that kind of the educational benefits, the community benefits, can be spread to more people for less, and so it just sort of shows that it's beneficial to have streaming available as well. And I think now, obviously in the COVID kind of era, streaming has become the norm, and I think people sort of expect it, which is I guess positive. And then so for the events, it's about 15 tons of carbon, and here you can see the orange on the right is the flights. So we knew for this there were flights associated with some of the presenters coming out. Maybe unfairly, we've attributed the majority of their flight emissions to these events, but obviously, many of them would have done other things during their time in Hong Kong, so perhaps that is slightly unfair. But anyway, it goes to show what the sway of flights is in terms of the impact on its carbon intensity. And then this is the total. So it's 82, 83 tons of carbon for now. We're still to add some of the curatorial conversation kind of events, and we're still working through. We might get some additional information as well about some of the other aspects.
But that's the kind of ballpark.
This is the ballpark, absolutely. Ooh. And just to put that in context, to absorb 83 tons of carbon would take about 3,700 trees 1 year to absorb that. It's about 125,000 books, 26,000 kilos of rice is the equivalent to that, which is 438,000 times people's daily consumption of rice. Just to put this into some
500,000 people's daily.
Yeah, 500,000 people eating rice for a day would cover our audio.
Or not eating rice.
Or not eating it. Yeah, exactly. And we touched on this. This is just a breakdown of the split between, you know, materials, operational energy, planning, design, and waste. It's worth pointing out that waste is very, very low, but the waste, so waste isn't necessarily, the impact of avoiding waste is hard to capture in a carbon footprint system because it's just not there. But there is a big impact of avoiding materials and reusing. So the emissions associated with taking some waste and driving them to a landfill, especially if they're inert, you know, organic waste that's going to decompose and give off methane is going to have high emissions. But other waste doesn't necessarily have a carbon impact in that way. It obviously has an environmental impact and a space impact and a social impact, and you know, you can see in Hong Kong's a prime example where there is a huge problem with waste in here, but it isn't really captured in this carbon footprint assessment in this way. But the emissions are lower where there's avoided waste, which so it's sort of indirectly included in that way. And then this is just showing, you know, from a distribution perspective, how we compare across different types of events. So, you know, ours is in green. You know, you've got a national conference. I think it's an American conference. Just some of the available data that we found online, just showing distributions of different event types. There's a World Cup in there, Sydney New Year's Eve show, local basketball game. And local basketball game is actually the closest we get, which again, I think is positive. You know, like the national conference shows a huge amount of, and the World Cup shows a huge amount of overseas travel, which for a lot of these things is by far the dominant, you know, emitter of carbon. You know, to have the majority of our emissions associated with local transport, and given that Hong Kong has such an excellent low carbon transport network, you know, I think this is actually quite a positive result. It sort of shows that, you know, even without having necessarily planned it in from the beginning, you know, what the biennale has achieved is a relatively low carbon event. And this shows some of the sort of distribution size. So it compares the exhibits and the events. So, you know, 0.3 kilos of carbon per visitor for the exhibitions, 0.5 kilos per person for the events if you ignore flights, about 3.5 if you include flights. And I'm not going to go through, this is just a summary of all the numbers. I'm not going to go through it, but it just shows here the difference between the intensity of local visitors, live streaming, and flights. So you can see it's per person 977, so almost 1 ton per person of carbon for flying versus 0.09 kilos of carbon for streaming, and 0.5 for local transport. So the next bit is just sort of like, what does it mean? And like, is it fair to look purely at carbon? You know, and what are sort of some of the kind of things that we need to sort of look at here? You know, highest emissions, we mentioned transport, flights, talk through those, impact of COVID as well. You know, reduced visitor numbers probably for the events, reduced, you know, so which is obviously a shame. And it's changed the way we're doing some of these future events as well. Increased virtual access is a positive. And the waste emissions, again, I've mentioned already, is you know, it's not adequately picked up because of the environmental impacts and, you know, the fact that avoided waste is a big thing as well. So while waste doesn't show, it's a big impact. From a limitations perspective, again, we've sort of talked through quite a lot of these. You know, data, we're only as good as the data that we were able to get. We've made a lot of educated assumptions as we've gone through, and I think we've got a very robust methodology that's kind of come to these numbers, and you know, and it's defensible. It's out there. The report includes exactly what we've done. So, you know, if someone else were to pick this up in 2 years, they could follow the exact same methodology, use the same assumptions, and come up with their own numbers. So whether we're off by 10%, 20%, either way, I think the methodology is at least consistent, and then as better quality information comes in, that can also do. I can just refine the quality and the actual accuracy of those results. And as Roger mentioned, starting it later, not starting it before, right at the early planning stages, meant that there was less of an ability to kind of design in data collection, design in carbon reduction strategies and things like that. But we've gone through, we've listed a few opportunities in the coming slides that sort of show what could be looked at in the future. So looking at reduction opportunities, there are sort of options at every stage of this to kind of reduce emissions. Like right from the early planning, deliberately selecting to be in to have your days in a low emitting office, maybe supplied by renewable energy or something like that. Then everything you do is reduced emissions. Using video conferencing rather than travel for meetings, encouraging the reuse of materials, encouraging materials to be shipped rather than flown, operation of venues, so using high efficiency equipment, using green power, selecting a venue that maybe is fueled by renewable energy as well to host your events, and then as we've touched on, for visitor transport, encouraging public transport, encouraging access via or ensuring that there is access remotely as well, both for visitors and for presenters, and so all the things we sort of talked through. And events, similar as well, less materials for events, but more maybe catering, so vegetarian or vegan food for catering, all waste food sent to maybe an AD plant, an anaerobic digestion plant, to produce biogas rather than being sent to a landfill. That would have a big impact. Our event didn't have a huge amount of organic waste, but others do. And then this just sort of shows in green, again showing the different attributes of the exhibits and the events, what the possible savings could be. For transport, we looked at a few things. So if all overseas presenters presented remotely rather than traveling deliberately for the event, then you cut maybe 10%, 5% of the emissions. 50% of these, so again, I've used the common denominator of 200,000 people in this. If 50% switch to live streaming, you can cut emissions by maybe 40% or more. More public transport, and if also there's the ability to offset your own emissions if you were to fly. It's relatively cheap, and there are lots of projects that you can do it. So in total, maybe 50% reduction could be achieved for the overall intensity based on what we've seen for this event. And again, we've touched on a lot of these things already, but it's really important to note that we've carried out a carbon footprint study for this, and there are other attributes. There's waste, there's environmental impact, there's health, there's education, social benefits, economic benefits. All of these are part of a wider sustainability kind of goals that while we think about them in this, they're not explicitly captured in the data. And maybe a future study could cover greenhouse gas emissions. They're very, very important, but could also perhaps try to integrate these other attributes as well, either in a qualitative or a quantitative way to sort of show that full kind of impact of the overall event. Also, another conversation that Roger and I have been having, and is about the venue. Now, it is true that the mills, it's quite a hike from the nearest MTR station to the mills. Otherwise it is relatively well connected by public transport. It could be, if it was in central, would there be more footfall? Potentially. So there is an argument to say, maybe you could select a venue that was in central or nearer people that everyone's going to visit. It's difficult to say. Perhaps near people's work, so that on their way home, they're going there anyway. They can go there anyway. but arguments for using the mills, it is a fantastic example of a regeneration project. It's, there are too few projects in Hong Kong where they've taken historic buildings and rejuvenated them rather than just knocking them down and starting again. This is another excellent example. Yeah, I meant to say. Yeah, so these, the Opa and the mills, perfect examples of a really successful projects that bring life and bring benefit to the community. They bring public space, open space, there's rooftop gardens. There's, it focuses heavily on sustainability as well. Like there's I think one of the first in the world garment to garment, like clothes recycling plant in the mills, and fabric. I think clothes have I think the second highest carbon emissions in the world after like power generation. And similarly, there are many shops focused on sustainable products, and so I would say that actually the mills is an excellent location for this event, and it's so other than the fact that it is slightly far to walk, I think that it's.
So if the mills is in Central, it would be absolutely perfect.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Let's move it.
And then also, as we touched on for like the Generating Greener Cities one we talked about earlier, education. So many of the exhibits that were included and the events and everything associated with the Biennale was focused on sustainability. So focus on how to reuse and recycle and reclaim good materials. Innovative kind of low carbon design options, renewable energy, air quality improvements, community engagement, community enhancement, and promoting sustainable design. And so, how do you balance that against the actual carbon intensity of the event? And if we were to have less operational energy, would it have been as interactive? Would it have been as good? It's not a simple question or answer. So I think it's worth doing these exercises because the more data you have, the more you'll understand it. But yeah, it's definitely not a simple equation for what is good, what is bad. And then finally, offsetting is an option. There are many fantastic projects around the world that can be invested in order to sort of offset your emissions, and they also have the benefit of investing in often third world countries that to improve infrastructure, to improve access to energy, renewable energy, or tree planting, or whatever it is having a positive impact. But it's still best to reduce emissions first. Yes, we should offset remaining emissions, but I think trying to avoid first is key. And that's all I got. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Jonny. And I think it's actually a very comprehensive report, which kind of condensed into half an hour's presentation. So we're happy to share it in our platform, although it's still in draft form, because obviously we haven't really completed it because we're still doing these online sessions. But it's also interesting. I'll come back to that a bit later on. But the fact that you ended on carbon offsetting is good. Is a very good cue for me to bring in Ding Li, our next guest presenter. Ding and I met quite recently, actually, through a mutual friend of mine. So, but Ding's kind of official title is Partner Business Development Manager for CLP, energy provider in Hong Kong, and but she's a lady of many hats, I think. But central to it, I think she's a true advocate of sustainable living in the work that she does. So in our very few kind of very brief conversations so far, I've learned a lot from her, and I think she has a lot to say about carbon offsetting. Also, in some of the things that you said just before you talked about carbon offsetting, about those social values, education values, and how potentially we could bring that into the equation, as it were. So I think let's not get me to steal your thunder. I'll pass your mic to you, Ding, and is yours. Thank you.
So let me very quickly introduce who's CLP Innovation and myself. So I'm the Partner Business Development Manager at CLP Innovation. So my role is really to help building the partnership between CLP innovation and the industry and the market. So why is CLP advocating for sustainability? So these are the target that we've set. So by 2050, we should reduce 80% of our carbon emission, and we have also committed to the advancing net zero commitment from the World Green Building Council. So this is really why we think like sustainability is in our core value. And at the same time, so in the team that I am in, so CLP Innovation, we are in a slightly different structure as CLP Power, that people would normally know as the power provider in Hong Kong, as the power company in Hong Kong. CLP Innovation is also under CLP Group, but we serve companies from all over Hong Kong, even outside of Hong Kong. So instead of CLP Power, we just provide electricity in new territories in Kowloon. So this is really our, like, the kind of value proposition that CLP Innovation has. So I think we mentioned before about renewable energy and energy efficiency. This is also in the equation. For us, we think the sustainability journey really starts with energy efficiency and renewable energy, and then offset with carbon credits for any unavoidable emission. So this is kind of the package that we're helping to bring to the market, so to provide the tools and the support needed. So today I'd like to talk a little bit more on the CLP carbon credit part for offsetting. Here is just a bit of taste of the market trend right now. So I'm not sure how familiar everyone is to this pledge. So for example, this COSIA is the airline industry commitment to be zero carbon. So they have the pledge of net zero carbon growth by 2020. So everything that's beyond 2020, all the emission increase should be offsetted. And TCFD and the Advancing Net Zero by World Green Building Council, these are all investor-driven initiative, as well as the principle of responsible investment. So just a quick overview on the carbon footprint impact in Hong Kong. So I'm sure everyone knows about climate change. We've heard of it. We know that it will rise our sea level, it increase temperature, and some might not know because of the temperature rise, it actually increased occurrence of epidemic. So we're in COVID-19 now, and as a sustainability professional, I would not disagree that this could be due to climate change as well. So according to a study done by WWF, our annual carbon emission is around 13.44 tons of carbon. And what is carbon credit? So carbon credits is really, from the very beginning, is from a climate agreement called Kyoto Protocol. So it is used as an instrument to provide funding to developing countries by developed countries. So basically, it is to incentivize developing countries to develop more low carbon projects, like for example, building wind farm in areas that would normally only have coal-fired power plants. So this is to use the minimal cost of resources that is available and achieve them to maximize the emission reduction that we can achieve. So how does carbon credits work? So as I said, this is a mechanism developed by the United Nations. We have an international standard on how carbon credits is verified. So in short, I wouldn't spend too much time on it because it's too technical. Like for example, for CLP, we have wind farms in many countries. So for example, India and China. This wind farm wouldn't have happened if it is not because of CLP. So against the business as usual scenario, we have reduced carbon emission because we have turned that coal-fired power plant into a wind farm. So that amount of avoided carbon emission can then be verified by a third party. So these third-party verifier will verify our operation in India, whether or not it is aligned with the United Nations protocol or not. So once it is verified, it will go on to the United Nations platform. So all our projects is publicized on the United Nations platform. And 1 unit of carbon credits equals to 1 ton of carbon emission. So what does 1 ton means? I think we have shared this kind of similar information in the previous presentation, but let me just put it in a Hong Kong context. So 1 ton actually had, it means more than 5 households use electricity use for a month, and 4,000 kilometers of non-EV passenger vehicle. That means, to put it in context, from Tuen Mun to Sai Kung is around 50 kilometers. So you're like driving back and forth of Tuen Mun and Sai Kung, which is the 2 very different ends of Hong Kong, for 80 times. So that's 1 ton of carbon emission. And I have to stress that a lot of people would think that carbon offset is just get out of jail card. In some way, I couldn't argue with that, but I would like to also stress on the social benefit that carbon credits could bring, because this is a mechanism for developed country to provide monetary funding to developing country. So a lot of times there's a knowledge transfer. For example, for India, in some remote region, people didn't used to have that skills of building a wind farm, for example. So it sort of involved like knowledge transfer, also provide funding to the local community, and we also conduct CSR projects focusing on climate resilience, water scarcity, women empowerment, etc. So I like to stress also the social benefit of carbon credits, which is often overlooked. So in terms of adoption, so this is the amount of companies that are adopting carbon credits right now in Hong Kong. I didn't just say it because these are all based on publicly available information. So these companies have shared that they have used carbon credits in their public report. Some of them are our clients, some of them are not, but I think we can all agree that there's a trend of increased adoption of carbon credits. So here I'd like to share a bit of case study of how businesses normally would adopt carbon credits, and these are real cases that they are our clients for carbon credits. So for example, for business travel, we have a number of companies that have come to us and offset their business travel, but I'm from CLP, of course, I'm gonna advocate for my company. So CLP, we do offset all our business travel emission since 2018. So all our executive business travel will be zero carbon. And in the shipping industry, sometimes it's the same for the airline industry, because these are industry that use a lot of fuel, that burns a lot of fuel. So, and a lot of time, energy efficiency and renewable energy couldn't purpose of reducing carbon emission. And offsetting is sometimes, although it's a last resort, but it's often being used as the tool to reduce carbon emission. So one of the major shipping company have came to us and they want to advocate for sustainability, and they are partnering with us to offset all the carbon emission for their fleet, for their operation, and all the emissions that they have influence on, for example, for business travel. And they would like to be an advocate in the industry to be the first shipping company that offer this zero carbon logistics. Another example is very innovative thinking, is because that normally you go to a wedding, you go to an annual dinner, you receive gifts, but a lot of time, how often do you really find those gifts useful? So there's a professional organization that have published a green event guideline that have particularly addressing these issues. is to offer carbon credits as a souvenirs instead of providing physical gifts to minimize waste generation. And then this organization actually takes a step further. Instead of only offsetting for their event emission, they have also provided this. They also offset their VIPs' annual carbon emission as a gift of appreciation to the VIPs. So I don't know. Do you remember what I mentioned before? Is that an average Hong Kong citizens normally generate around 13 to 14 tons of carbon emission per year. So this organization is purchasing 14 tons of carbon emission for all the VIPs, and they're encouraging all the other participants in this annual dinner to sponsor carbon offset for their own emission as well. And then, oh yeah, this is my last slide. So finally, is a rather typical case for carbon credits adoption. So we have a few carbon neutral companies that are using CLP carbon credits. So one of it is the ICT company, a multinational ICT company that they have a commitment to reduce carbon emission. And they have actually achieved net zero carbon since 2014 by using offsets to offset the unavoidable emissions. And in the meantime, they have maximized the opportunity in terms of energy efficiency. So that is equivalent to more than 1,000 tons of emission, covering all the scope 1, scope 2. Scope 1 and 2 is really related to all the fuel or the electricity that we use, and scope 3 emission is all the emission that we can influence. So, for example, waste generation. So you can see there are a lot of possibilities with carbon credits, and I like to stress is carbon credits normally. Some people criticize carbon credits is just it's just paying to solve your problem, but at the same time, it's increasingly important because it is served as the last resort to achieve net zero carbon, and this is urgent now, and every company should act to be zero carbon. Because today I came into my home office and then it is 39 degrees, so I really don't want to spend more money on aircon. And thank you very much.
You know, just checking on my phone, I can see that there's some exhibitors listening to this session, some of the organizers, as well as sponsors and so on. So we will engage with them to figure out how we're going to offset this. You know, so that's the reason why Dings has done his presentation very clearly, you know, explaining what this is about. So thank you very much for that. And we will obviously talk more about that a bit later on. So by the, we talk about flying and so on, so using the, you know, starting from sort of a person who's the furthest away from us, so Peter, just to get your views from you know, what we've talked about today, and any particular views you have?
I do. I'd first of all like to congratulate you both, Roger and Jonny, for what I think is a really interesting report, and I'm definitely, I think carbon credits is something that we certainly need to look at from here as well. But I am on the board of the London Festival of Architecture, and I've already circulated the report to all the directors of that to make sure that they learn from what you're doing. And I think that if one thinks that actually holding events like biennales and festivals and so on is about sharing learning and sharing ideas and sharing the way that we create a better environment, I think this is a wonderful example of how you can use it for your own purposes, but I think it also is something you can share with a lot of other organizations, and we are one of them in London. I think this is really valuable. I think it certainly, you know, puts into context my flight to Hong Kong. I now feel very but also I think it's something which is very high on all our agendas at the moment, as we've taken to this form of communication in a remarkably short space of time. I mean, I think it is fairly amazing how society has sort of shifted the way it does things very quickly because of COVID-19. And this clearly, us talking today is a lot better for the planet than me flying over to Hong Kong for an hour's chat. And, those are the sort of things that we did do before. And I don't think we'll do them again. And I think there is clearly a need for us to travel, but I think we will, I certainly will travel with more intention in the future. And so I think these sorts of exercises are really important, from everything to, how you choose the materials for your exhibition, what you do with them afterwards, all sorts of things which maybe too often we don't think about enough. So I think this is a excellent initiative, something that we can learn from really, and something which I definitely will give to all my team to check what they're doing in terms of putting on exhibitions, organizing events, getting people together, and also communicating internationally. So really well done. I think it's great.
Thank you, Peter. I mean, interestingly, in the back of my mind, there's something that's still kind of nagging me a little bit. In that, we in the world, there's still some naysayers. All of this, climate change, it's a myth, right? So it is not completely out of the equation that the next curators of the next biennale would not want to do any of this.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they would or they wouldn't, but it's entirely possible. If we take that out of the way, the methodology is here for them to, and I'm sure they will, for them to do much better.
Yeah.
Because the idea that we said that, had we done it earlier, we would have done this. In a way, I think it depends how, yes, it is true, but also there they would have been able, they would then be able to factor in, how they choose a site. They would be able to factor in what sort of, when they choose a site, things like what sort of energy that site uses could potentially come into it. So I think that we by exposing ourselves, if you like, we've kind of made that happen. I think that's very, very, very helpful. And then on the other hand, I think what also struck me was the fact that, what Peter was saying, that he's, it is halfway through our process that COVID-19 hit.
Yeah.
So maybe part of this study is that if it didn't hit us, if we had carried out all our exhibits, all our events, exactly as we would have done, extrapolate what we've done before, and look at what that figure is at the end of that, and then comparing what the real figure is, then the difference would be quite startling, I would imagine. Yeah. Looking at the fact that flights and so on, how it would have affected it.
Yeah, I think the per person figures will be the most striking.
Yeah.
Because of the fact that it's just easier to engage a much larger number of people through this medium than it is by forcing people to come to a particular occasion at a particular time.
Yeah.
And the fact that these are not only live online events, but they're also available, they're recorded, they're available afterwards, they can be watched afterwards, and so yeah.
So ladies first, can I, Laura, you any thoughts you want to share with us after seeing the presentations and our discussions?
This was such a compelling presentation, actually. It really showed extremely clearly and graphically what we've been going through. And in my personal case, I used to be on a flight twice a month to Japan, being on and off the plane, Japan, Hong Kong, London, all the time, without giving it much thought and thinking that it was actually quite normal and necessary for business. And now I'm on video conference most of the time, almost 24/7. We're having this debate globally through video conference. And to be honest, things are getting done. And they are not getting done worse than before. And so I completely join Peter in his opinion that in the future, traveling is a much more conscious and thought through decision. It's no longer something that you do regularly and normally without giving it a thought, because the impact it has is so huge. I mean, it represented so much out of this entire event. It's quite amazing. And so I think it's really put in perspective our previous actions, and climate change is not something to be taken lightly at all. And I think that we've all seen also, I mean, it's particularly in Hong Kong now, I've been stuck in Hong Kong since March, and I've seen how not having any flights, limited traffic, etc., the climate is unbelievable. I've never seen Hong Kong with such clear skies.
The air quality.
The air quality is amazing.
Yeah.
It's the change is so stark that I hope we will never go back to what we used to do before, because our quality of life is just much improved in that sense. It's gotten worse in a different sense, because we are facing being isolated from each other, and we are social beings. We are in a limited space. So for people like me, it's not a big issue, because I am a lucky person. I have a study in my flat, which is quite a luxury. But for many people, it's brought home domestic violence, and also being isolated, jobless, etc. in small spaces has brought different issues. But that's kind of my first reaction to this. And the second thing was operational cost and food. And I think COVID has made us also a lot more conscious about food consumption, especially food and products that come from overseas, because it's been more difficult to bring things from abroad in general. And it's resumed since, but for a while we had to rely on what was around us, and I think that's also something that we should really consider. Do I want to eat strawberries in December? Do I really need strawberries in December? Do I need tomatoes? Do I need apples in June? And my husband is like, why? Is it not normal? I'm like, apples is September. It just getting back into a more seasonal and local approach to food as well. I think your chart clearly showed that it would be a big help as well in terms of sustainability.
Thank you, Laura. I mean, before I go to you, Anna, I just want to say for those who are joining us online, please submit your questions. If you have anything to ask, I'll get access to that so we can discuss those. Otherwise, we'll be just talking here all night, I'm sure. No, we won't. But anyway, so Alan, you obviously been working with me all the time. Bad luck. But anyway, throughout this biennale, but and you've seen us working on this. What do you think of the report? And was how would you take share it, or you think it's worth it?
Yeah. I think I'm really delighted to see the report in the stack of paper, because I printed out in hard copy. It's really good. I think Roger is pushing really good for this kind of legacy as a sustainability report. So, but when I look at the data, for example, we need almost 4,000 numbers of trees to absorb what we have curated for the past year. I feel a bit sad on that. But of course, all the data in the report is really useful, because as one of the co-curator, I would say I really look forward for coming either Biennale or other exhibitions can really adopt some of our insight or finding to push a more sustainable exhibition design or curation. Because I still remember when we select the exhibitors, I mean, we just look at basically the content or does it related to the 3 main themes. But then imagine in the future, would there be a chat box there to see that, okay, this work may be related to how much carbon footprint, so we can give a take on that part. So I'm thinking, is there a possibility that we can have this kind of guideline for no matter it's a biennale or other big exhibitions in the world? I think that definitely that's really, beneficial. And then back to like Peter and Laura mentioned, is it traveling is a must? Because in current, this period of time under COVID-19, yes, I agree there's a lot of video conference, a lot of different kind of webinars. Actually, I learned a lot more than physically attend some of the sections, because we can really fully utilize the time. For example, I have one screen here and then I have my phone on the other hand. Actually, I've learned a lot, more diverse knowledge in this period of time. So, there's something that I think is very interesting when I look at the data in your report saying, okay, transportation actually is occupied the large numbers of carbon footprint. So that it kind of got me thinking, what will be the future for exhibition, for meetings, or even for like our design industry?
Great, thank you, Alan. Anything you want to add to the comments?
Well, I think, Alan, your comment about how do we consume these things, like I think it would be sad to lose entirely, right? Like I think having physical places that you travel to that serve that purpose is essential. And I think there's studies showing that investment in culture and in galleries, in museums, in like having events of this nature, it is a positive benefit to society. It's economically positive, it's culturally positive, it's community as well. Having the ability of all of them though to be remotely accessed, maybe whether it's ensuring that as well as submitting a physical part of it, you also submit a digital part of it, and so you like in the future we can walk into like with our like a VR headset on, we can walk into the exhibit and experience it, maybe even walk in and experience it with a friend of ours in the States or something like that, and like maybe there's a way, like, and because you can see from a carbon perspective, you can see the benefit, right? But I still think there's that other benefit, the social benefit that we need to capture, and I think exploring how that can be achieved would be really interesting.
It's interesting you say that, because it's just going back to the beginning, our theme 2 by 2, imagine to innovate, because in the way I see it is that the technology is there to do what you're saying, but in a way, the theme of the Biennale is that we need to imagine what we want, how we want it. Yes, we still want to do some of the physical kind of interactions and social interactions. And we need to imagine what that world looks like, because the technology, there are many clever boffins who could do that, deliver that. And if we can imagine a world that we want to live in and give the brief to these people, then they will help us to push that imagination for it to become reality. And it is really that spirit that we want to encourage through, all of us, not just the professionals, but everybody to think along those sort of lines. And I think that to me is very important.
Yeah.
Interestingly, also, Laura, you mentioned food and so on, and you also mentioned that we have a very low kind of carbon emission based on sort of catering and so on.
Yes.
So it actually brings back to a point where earlier I mentioned that sustainability is also one of the very key kind of CSR initiatives of our sponsors at DBS. And in fact, specifically about food waste is also a very, very big area. And because we didn't have any food, so we didn't waste any. But funny enough, because of COVID-19, about a couple of weeks ago, we managed to line things up so that part of that sponsorship was used to offset by a cancelled event for COVID-19. Food's been ordered, was going to be wasted. So through that collaboration, we bought that food off the caterer, make it, and we deliver it to Salvation Army for people who are in need. So the idea is, pardon the pun, we call the initiative Waste Less. is share more. So the idea of taking that initiative of the more sort of relevance, a sense of relevance and the sense of urgency and the sense of opportunity, it's great. You know, we managed to, it was so well received by the sponsor, DBS, and we will be doing more of that because as it happened in Hong Kong, you know, for the last few days, all the, for the last few days, we couldn't actually eat in any of the eateries. There wouldn't have been a lot of food waste, so we will swoop that up, we'll mix on some more meals and we'll deliver it through our waste less is share more initiative. So that I like to bring that because in a way that wouldn't have been able to come into that calculation.
It wouldn't have happened.
But in a way, you know, then it brings back to I want to bring in a thing it kind of linked to one of the conversations we've had earlier about how do you calculate social benefits? How do you calculate the educational benefits? Because you know we you know the exercise we've done, we could measure it by how long, how big, in a way, you know, how much it weighs, 1 kilogram.
Easily quantifiable.
So then, you know, we've had a kind of a very brief conversation on that, and I want you to share your views on that.
Yeah, sure. So it was also I'm also referring to Jonny the study that we mentioned before about, you know, waste has a lot of environmental impact, but it doesn't reflect on the emission inventory. So there's this idea of social value. Oh, I'm putting on another hat as a strategy consultant for Longevity Partner, which is a consultancy based in the UK. So social value is really the idea of measuring the change. So normally, what would be the situation where we can measure social value is before and after we have changed. So how do we do this is really through interviewing stakeholders, interviewing people who come to the events, interviewing people around events. So for example, for the meal, we have this events happen 2 years in the meal. Does it bring in more people to the meal, and does it cause like traffic congestion, or does it bring more business to the restaurant nearby? This kind of what we call changes, it really affects in a very wide variety of areas, and also like what's mentioned just now about waste generation, and also about how we donated to NGOs, so that because of the events, so more disadvantaged people will have access to healthy food. So this kind of impact, that the social impact that has happened because of the events, will be all taken into the calculation of social value. But of course, because there are so many different possible impacts that could happen, there will be a selection process called materiality assessment. So we'll prioritize those impacts that is really, really important, like a lot of stakeholders saying the same thing. And those impacts that is confirmed to be important will be taken into the assessment, and there are financial proxy associated with each of these impacts. So for example, because disadvantaged community have access to healthier food, so therefore the need for social health service will decrease. And this is kind of like a kind of proxy, a list of proxy database that is being well researched by experts in social science, in a lot of areas that it has contributed to the evaluation of social value. So taking those proxy and multiplying the impact of the proxy, there's also a very important final stage, which we call discounting. So what would happen, like if we didn't have this event in the first place? So for example, if it is not because of RIBA that have held this event, that have donated food to NGO, would there be like similar organization that would have doing the same in Chunwan, for example? So this also kind of offset the social benefit that we bring. So this is called the disability process. So after going through all of this process, measuring change, applying the financial profit and discounting, then it will give you a social value. Sometimes we use a tool called the social return on investment. So for example, for $1 of investment, how many dollars of social value has it generated? And then you can value which event is better than.
Wow, I mean, I think that's, I mean, in a way, it's interesting because have we, have we structured it differently, we could potentially, think of how we could kind of tie that in a way. So maybe watch this space. Maybe we could talk to Ding after this and get some of that element into the reporting, or at least a pathway for the future. To think about those sort of lines. Peter, you mentioned earlier that you start sharing with others and through your experience in your network. I'm slightly, well, not slightly, but we talked about this, is that we couldn't find very equivalent example of something like this on,
Well, yeah, I mean,
we had to, some of the methodology we had to kind of start from,
I mean, there are carbon footprint assessments of events and things like that. Yeah, like that's something very, very aligned with exactly what we're doing. There are fewer, of course, but yeah, it's more that you get quite a few for corporate events and stuff like that. I think one of this nature, there are fewer.
So, do you think, Peter, there is a blue sky picture that will get a British standards out of this?
Right. You mean for social value or from event emission?
For event or kind of this sort of
I have to say I'm very impressed for the presentation that Jonny just gave, because even for like as a consultant in my previous job, I have been calculating carbon footprint also for events, but that level of detail, I have to say, is the first time I've seen. So I want to say it's really impressive. And I think what you have done here should be really we should make it publicly available, and also the best practice that Roger you just mentioned, the how we share food to NGOs. This we need a space to consolidate all of this so that other event managers in the future that they can make reference to the good work that we've done in this exhibition, and also other possibility apart from carbon emission, for example, the food donation that Roger mentioned. I think this is really, you guys are building it. I haven't seen any standard locally and internationally that is currently at that level.
So Peter,
and I look forward to seeing it from you guys.
I mean, I think that would be a good thing, but actually raising awareness is almost equally important, and
sure.
And people who are putting on exhibitions actually perhaps aren't as geared up as people building buildings aren't. I mean, if you're architect involved in building a building, you have to be very aware of every ounce of building materials that you use these days. You know that, but people putting on exhibitions, actually it doesn't really come across their desk in quite the same way. So I think that from their point of view, I think that this report very neatly, as Ding says, I mean, provides a really good, almost a checklist of those things you need to be aware of. And I think that just looking at the data you have allows people very easily to get a better perception of what impact events that they're doing has on their own environment. And in London, generally the events that we do, we don't fly many people in. Most people come locally, but I would say that particularly when you put on exhibitions, there are lots of materials that people don't actually think very hard about. What does this material use? A lot of them use plastic foams of various kinds, and you think, well, actually, why don't, before we choose that, we need to look at the impact that has on our general carbon count. And I would say that this, I congratulate you on the report, but actually I also congratulate you on the presentation of it, because it's really easy to digest and see those comparators, and then I think to transfer that into different environments, different experiences, and different ways that we do things. But I just think this is exactly the sort of thing that biennales are about. I think trying out things, seeing how it works, and then passing on information to others. And I think it's as I say, it's great.
To tell you the truth, until the figures came out, I was very nervous about how, what tonnage it was. I had no idea.
It's quite low, like, relatively speaking.
I must say, I also have to congratulate the Hong Kong Institute of Architects Biennale Foundation to let us do it, because we could have opened up a whole can of worms and say, well, actually, and we've been very, very fortunate to have a sponsor who was very, very understanding to allow us to do that. But equally, it could have put a lot of pressure on future biennales. But what we found was the fact that actually, in order to achieve, the things you suggested for 50% reduction is actually quite straightforward to tell you the truth. Yeah.
But we were also lucky because of COVID-19, because Tim and I would have come out another couple of times in a year, and that would have really skewed the figures.
Yes, exactly.
Roger, I know we have a time limit here, but I have a very quick question for Jonny. So I see in the report that material is actually one of a very carbon intensive item in the inventory, and I think the same for the real estate industry that Peter you have mentioned. Every building, we use a lot of construction material, and how we build is really important. What would be your recommendation for the material part? Like, how do we reduce material for events? Material emissions for events?
I mean, I think the biggest would be the reuse of previous, or ensuring that, like, one thing I've thought about for this was plan that your exhibit is going to be in several different places. Rather than planning for it for a single event, think about it as, okay, right, we're going to put it here, but then, that's only going to be for half a year. Where could it go next? And start to plan it in, and ideally in the local environment, or ship it somewhere else, fine, because shipping is relatively low carbon. But I would say that for sure. And then obviously, like, if you can source material that that was reused before, that was recycled, that was reclaimed. Also, like, one thing that isn't captured necessarily when I list out the hierarchy of all the things is maybe 20 or 30% of the materials were boards. They were structures that were supplied by the mills, by the Biennale to present the work. So that the organizers have control over right from the beginning, and the ability to maybe standardize particular materials, standardize display structures, in a way that is modular and can be detached afterwards. A lot of the materials that were used for the structure some were given away, which is great. There's some, but a lot did end up in the landfill because they were designed. It wasn't thought about to reuse them afterwards.
It's an interesting question. I'll bring Alan in a bit later after this, because I think for me there are three things here. First of all, once we started talking about this, I came across a new profession called cardboard engineer. What they do is that they build cardboard exhibition or structures out of cardboard that is collapsible, flat packable, and reusable. So had we started earlier, we would have perhaps explored, engaging a cardboard engineer to help us. I mean, that would have been one way to look at the materiality of it. Yeah. The second thing was that we were also incredibly lucky in that the Biennale happened to be in a semi-commercial environment where there were shops and there was an art space. And a lot of the structure that we built to hold the exhibit, at the end, the retailer took them away, used that as part of the display. So we actually reduced a lot of waste away. Now, we couldn't have controlled it, but I think it would inform people when, like Alan and I went through, when we, at the beginning, the selection of venue would have been that could have been potentially a factor. Thirdly, this table was part of the exhibit. At the end, what we did was that we thought, well, okay, before they were trashed, we invited a few people to look at, is there anything you want? I took a couple of things and other people took a few things. And at one point we were going to ask the university to come and see if any material they would be able to take away for the models, for students to make models with it. But unfortunately, during that time, nobody were in the university. It was, we were disturbed by the social movement and so on. But there were things that could have been done, but we couldn't do it. But there were things that we took the opportunity for the venue and for things like that. So the reusability was interesting.
Yeah.
But I want to bring Alan in and say, well, actually, yes, reusability. But do you remember one of the criteria for us to judge, to select exhibitors, were the originality of the exhibit?
Right.
Would you change?
I would say I would keep the idea of originality.
Yeah, I agree.
But I would look at the possibility of the afterlife, because I can see some of the potential projects they can already bring the idea of afterlife. So similar to some of the projects that I've been doing, we always think about what will be the second or third life of the exhibits. So there's something that we may be able to incorporate in the future exhibitions and one of the criteria to judge. But I think originality is what we have to keep for an exhibition.
Yeah.
So we want it first, but then they can pass it on to somebody else, right?
Exactly.
That's what you're saying. Excellent. So yeah. Well, I wouldn't be doing it again. So maybe
it may still be original to the new audience. You know?
No, you're right. You're absolutely right.
I also got one question about, to Jonny, about the venue selection, because for some of the dedicated exhibition hall, or for other potential venue like the Muse, how can we have a benchmark or recommendation for other designers to choose the exhibition venue, so in order to have a lower carbon footprint? What would be the criteria for that? In this preparation stage.
The simple ones would be access to public transport, via multiple modes, so as to deter, individual vehicles, even like potentially selecting venues that don't have a lot of parking as well. Hong Kong's great for this. It's nothing has access by road.
But I was going to say select a venue with a lot of bike parking, but then I don't think many people would get there. Like cycling in Hong Kong.
Public transport's great in Hong Kong. Cycling infrastructure is not so great.
Or renewable energy. Check whether they're using renewable energy.
Exactly. Renewable energy was one I was going to mention as well. Again, it's difficult in Hong Kong. If CLP actually delivers on this promise, then I would select venues not on Hong Kong Island in that case.
Sure. Yeah. No, but actually, I'd like to answer that question from a different perspective. And I said, well, if I was a venue provider, then perhaps one of the selling points is that we use renewable energy, or the infrastructure. You come to us to hold your exhibition, it already gives you a credit in the sense that we are a very kind of a low energy venue. By the fact that you have infrastructure for this VR or whatever, or you use low carbon, or you use an electric vehicle to ferry people around and so on. And I think it's a challenge for if you put it another way, it's a challenge for venue providers to see how they could provide a market differentiator. Yeah, I don't mean venue rental costs, but the kind of environmental costs.
Right, so similar to what Ding was saying about the logistics operator, trying to differentiate themselves through. I'm sure, I would hope that it would happen more and more, and so yeah.
We've talked a lot, and I think we've kind of and we've talked so much that there are many kind of questions, because I think, so last word, Laura, can I give you the last words before I close the session?
Last words. Travel less, travel better, eat locally, think before, plan ahead your exhibitions with all of that in mind. Just in general, we have now no excuse to be more aware of our decisions and the impact of our decisions, because we can see the effect of what not doing what we've been doing in the past, say 10 years does, and it's good. It's generally good. So we've now got no excuse. We cannot go back to how we were. When we travel next, if we're able to, it has to be meaningful. When we order something or buy something at the supermarket or at the wet market, let's be mindful that it has to be local, seasonal, preferably not meat, although I do love meat, but reduce that and all do our bit.
Thank you. So thank you very much, Jonny. Thank you very much for everybody joining us. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Ding. Thank you, Laura, and thank you, Alan. Thank you, as I said, Hong Kong IA Institute, Hong Kong IA Biennale Foundation for letting us do this, and DBS for giving us the resources and commitment to doing this. So all of this was, without any of this party, we wouldn't have been able to do that. And I hope this is not the end. I think as Peter says, we should, and Dane says, we should let more people know about this and take it forward to the next step. And since Curatorial number 8, back in 16th of June, we've had 5 sessions over the course of just over 6.5 weeks. So this is great. I mean, the topics around sustainability in terms of environment, in terms of the community, in terms of the society, has been very, very engaging. And sadly, this is the last of a series of curatorial conversations. But it's not. It doesn't mean the end of the conversations, because as we said, these are recordings. Share them, even comment on them, so that people looking at the recording, you can share your views on this. But there are still a few more Hong Kong Biennale events under a slightly different banner called Imaginicity, which is actually a term that we coined between Imagine and City. It as a sort of a theoretical measure of how imaginative a city could be. So the idea is to fertilize ideas between different sectors and so on. And we did, funny enough, in this very space, we did a couple of recording sessions already, which we will release in August. And I'm very excited about it, as you can imagine, I always will. But watch this space, and we hope to see you in this space again in August. And thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for joining. And good night from us.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.